And we are live. Good evening, everyone, and Happy New Year to you. It's a pleasure to have you here tonight, and I thank you for joining us for this post-show discussion of Everfelt. As you've just seen, it is an informative, open, and beautifully put together video piece about personal experiences of social anxiety created by Lorna Quinn. I'm joined here tonight by the woman herself, Lorna Quinn, the creator behind this piece, Everfelt. I'm also joined by senior psychologist, director and founder of Social Anxiety Ireland, Odhrán McCarthy. Over in the chat box, we have Maria, First Fortnight volunteer and legend. She'll be busy on the queues tonight, replying to all your comments. So if you have any questions or anything you'd like to say, make sure to send it in to Maria and she will forward it on to me. Just to give you a brief idea of how tonight will work, the discussion will last between 30-45 minutes. We'll hear first from Lorna, and who will say a few words, and then we'll hear from Odhrán as well, and it'll be followed up by some questions. At the end, we'll be taking questions from the audience, and we will do our best to answer as many as we can in the time frame. So I'd just like to thank you all for joining us, and I will hand you over to the wonderful, Lorna, sorry, total blank.
Okay. Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Odhrán, for being here, and thank you, everybody, for joining us this evening. I really, really appreciate your presence and your support so much. I'd love to just start off today just by saying a few words about the piece, about creating it, and about, I suppose, making the decision to share something so personal. I'm very aware that it's a very simple piece, and also that the sentiments expressed are quite difficult to listen to, quite upsetting, quite harsh, hard, critical, and maybe stunting in terms of living a full and happy life. Everything's not tied up with a pretty ribbon at the end with the words, and everybody lived happily ever after. And I suppose it's not about that. It's about presenting very clearly what it can be like to experience social anxiety, the typical thoughts and feelings and assumptions and beliefs you might have. It's about raising awareness. And I suppose with social anxiety, it can really make you feel like you're to blame, you're the problem, you're not good enough, you're not good enough company. And for me, I can certainly relate to that. And creating Everfelt was a way for me to almost express to those close to me in my life what can go on for me at times, how I can feel and how I can think about myself. This is why I have difficulty expressing myself, maybe. This is why I can come across as being awkward sometimes. It's not you, it's me. So whilst things aren't maybe tied up with a pretty ribbon at the end, it's very much rooted in truth. I still do experience social anxiety from time to time, but that's okay. And I suppose acting for me has provided me with a release to step into a character's shoes and say lines that are already prepared. And there's wonderful freedom in that. And given my experience as an actor and my experience with mental health difficulties and challenges at times, I very much wanted to create something positive out of something that has been quite difficult for me in my life. And Everfelt is the result of that. And yes, the sentiments shared are quite difficult to listen to, but I still do think it's a positive piece because it's shining light on a condition that if it remains suppressed and hidden due to shame, it can make life incredibly difficult for somebody. So my hope is that if there is somebody watching this evening that can relate to the words shared, that they will know, first of all, that they're not alone. And second of all, that they may consider reaching out and talking to somebody, be that a friend, a family member, maybe a helpline, a support group, or a therapist. Creating Everfelt for me, engaging in conversations about it with Odhrán, with the support group, with my family, with my friends, has been very helpful for me, and I think cathartic in a way. And to hear the responses that I've received, it's been so validating for me. That's confirmed for me maybe that what Everfelt is worthwhile and worth sharing. 15 years ago, I knocked on the door at the UCC student counselling office. I was 21. And 15 years later, I feel I've come a long way and ready to share something like this evening, happy to share it and comfortable to share it. and very, very grateful to the First Fortnight Festival for affording me the opportunity to share my piece this evening. I greatly appreciate it, and I greatly appreciate the support that I've received throughout this process. And I'm very happy to have this conversation here tonight with everybody present. So thank you for allowing me to say those few words before we start our question and answer session this evening. Thank you.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Lorna, and thank you for that introduction. Odhrán, I don't know if you'd like to say a few words just before we get started.
I'm not sure after that excellent conversation there by Lorna. She really articulated herself very well. Very pleased to be here. Delighted that something like this has got off the ground and into a form like this. Quite surprised, pleasantly surprised to say the least. Over the years, I would certainly have been invited to join interviews on radio and TV occasionally, with the idea of speaking about social anxiety as a professional, I suppose, working in this area. And I'm regularly asked if I could bring somebody along with me, somebody with the lived experience of it that could kind of speak from the inside out from what it's like. And I think this particular piece really nails that quite well. Not quite well, extremely well. But I've always found it very difficult. I mean, as I'd often say to producers, you know, you're asking people to talk about something that they don't talk to anyone about. It's something that's very silent, like a silent epidemic. And I almost would used to say, if I could get somebody to come in and talk to you like that about these kind of things, then by the time I got them in, they wouldn't have social anxiety. So you'd miss it in some ways. And I think Lorna captured that kind of quality quite well throughout this piece, this sense of wanting to speak, wanting to have a voice, wanting to connect, which I think is at the heart of it. We're social beings, we need to connect. So really wanting to connect and yet having a kind of a self-imposed barrier placed over that sense of wanting to and yet feeling or failing when I try to, and being in that constant dilemma constantly. So I'm much more kind of just enthralled with Lorna for finding the courage to put something like this together and throw it out there. It is very rare to find someone who will do something like this. And then to do it in such a poetic and powerful way just makes a bit of icing on the top of the cake. So thank you, Lorna.
I totally agree. The power of it is the fact that it's coming from your personal experience, Lorna, and it makes it very relatable. And in that way, people can really connect. And I think that's why it's such a special piece, actually. I'm just wondering, Lorna, creating a piece about social anxiety whilst having social anxiety, did you find that liberating, challenging, or a mixture of both of those kind of elements?
I think I found it definitely liberating to be able to give voice and expression to often unspoken thoughts and fears and feelings and beliefs about yourself that you may be carrying inside, but to be able to express them was hugely liberating. A friend described it to me recently as almost slaying the beast within, that nasty, mean inner critic that can make life so difficult. But actually, you know, holding it up for what it is and giving voice to it, it loses its power. Oftentimes that inner critic can be hidden and suppressed due to shame and silence and fear. But actually, when you say, I experience social anxiety, or I'm not feeling so well within myself, suddenly you feel lighter and it's not so big anymore. So that's what I've noticed in creating this piece. It's almost like I'm making something of it. It's like, I'm not going to let you control me anymore. I'm taking the reins now and I'm taking control of my life because I'm so sick and tired of you making my life so miserable and difficult. That's where it's coming from. It's like I was saying in our interview earlier in the week, Sarah, it's like, I have to do this. I've reached a stage now where I'm so sick and tired of it that I just need to do something with it. And it's helped me, but I also hope that it would help others as well, because, you know, I've attended the support group at Social Anxiety Ireland for a few years now, and you know, it's been wonderful. And I'm engaged in these conversations all of the time. And I'm hearing from, you know, myself and others how difficult life can be when you experience social anxiety, you know. So I wanted to give voice to that, to all of those, you know, those sharings that I'm hearing within the support group, to be able to give voice to it and make people aware of it. And by doing that, it lessens its power. And so it's been hugely liberating. And the more I'm talking about it with my friends and family now, the more I'm hearing that lots of people experience social anxiety to certain degrees, you know, to varying degrees, maybe not to the extent that, you know, I might have experienced it sometimes, but just they can relate. And when you hear that, it doesn't feel so, I don't know, it doesn't feel so, I don't know what the word is, but it's supportive when you talk to somebody and they tell you that they feel the same. There's comfort in that.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think that's a really positive message, isn't it? That this idea that if you can face into the discomfort and, you know, it can become lighter, and, you know, you can work through it. And like you just said there, you know, it does really affect a huge amount of people. And I think that would be my next question to you, Odhrán, is how common is this? How many people does this really affect?
It's quite difficult to fully nail those kind of things. Those kind of prevalence studies are hard to get published, hard for people to get to do them. And we could certainly say that it's the third most common emotional difficulty on the planet. Very much more maybe prevalent in the Western worlds. We had a stab at looking at it here in Ireland ourselves. Again, I'd have preferred if the methodology was a little bit better to kind of nail it down. But we're talking about somewhere around between 14 and 70% of the Irish population, certainly scoring in the kind of range that we would expect people with social anxiety to score in. But I think Lorna makes a reasonable point there. I think the experience of anxiety in social situations, I think, is something every person knows. You know, it's very, very rare to meet someone who's never experienced some degree of embarrassment about something they've said or done or whatever in the social world. It happens. But then there's like a continuum from there all the way through to kind of a notable peak at one end where someone is so disabled by this that they simply pull back from the world completely and live 24/7 alone. So the whole kind of continuum in some ways. So I would talk about maybe 1 in 20 people really, really struggling badly, but maybe one in 9 actually, you know, having bits of it, as it were. Maybe not enough to come looking for help, but certainly interfering with the quality of their life, which is a shame.
Yeah, because there's quite a scale in it, like you just said.
Yeah, and it's almost like the top 3 emotional difficulties are kind of partners in crime. So what does Irish people do when they're feeling anxious in social situations? We go for a drink. We take a drink in advance of something.
Yeah.
And certainly that's one of the top 3. And it's hard to know, you know, with the people with social anxiety or with alcohol misuse problems, that they start with social anxiety and just through a way of trying to deal with that ended up with a second kind of problem with alcohol misuse. And also that sense of, I mean, you picked it up really well through a lot of that kind of the sense of isolation, disconnection, loneliness that people with social anxiety experience. And I think over time that can lead to depression. So I think all top 3 are part of almost like an unholy trinity that kind of go together. And we recognize alcohol misuse and we recognize depression, but we often don't see that third partner there, that often plays out in those kind of circumstances.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think this last year as well, COVID has really shown us the importance of connection, you know, and that interaction as well.
Yeah, and that term social distancing, it's like, oh no, physical distancing. That's all we're talking about. Don't socially distance. And in some ways, we've had fun with this, I suppose, over the last year in a kind of in a black humor kind of way, in terms of, you know, and I think Lorna kind of touched over there a little bit as well, the idea of, I mean, all the restrictions and all the kind of instructions given by the government around this, which are very important that we should follow through, actually does somehow fall into the laps of people with social anxiety in terms of it also legitimizes a lot of what they do anyway. Now, that's one side of the equation. It also then, for anyone who was in a progress and was beginning to get up and moving and begin to kind of get back out into that world and challenge themselves slowly but surely, all that opportunity is gone. some people were kind of doing quite well, or pimping up, and all of a sudden COVID come in, and all their chances, I suppose, to kind of improve themselves have been lost in many ways. So
Yeah.
it's been a mixed bag.
Yeah, and I guess it'll be interesting to see as well if those numbers will increase after this period of social distancing in terms of social anxiety.
It'll be curious to see. I mean, certainly kind of improvement or the kind of the capacity to somehow get to where Lorna is, where she can speak out in this kind of way. It's hard to see that being achieved with the current circumstances in place. So sooner the better we all get vaccinated and get back to some degree of normality.
Yeah, absolutely. Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed, yeah.
And Lorna, just to go back to you, I'm conscious that you have social anxiety, or if you've experienced it. Can you tell us what it's like for you now? Have you got to that point where it's kind of, I'm not sure what the word I'm looking for is, but does it affect you daily, or how is the experience for you at the moment?
Well, right here this evening, I'm very happy to be here tonight. I really wanted to have this post-show discussion because I felt, given the sentiments shared throughout Everfelt, that they're quite difficult and upsetting to listen to. I very much wanted to meet with the audience and just have a chance to have this conversation. And, tonight I've had time to prepare my thoughts in advance of this evening and think about what it is I'd like to share tonight. And that's helped me to be prepared for tonight. And I know the subject matter being discussed, that also helps. And I know that tonight, those watching are here because they want to be here. And I know my friends and family are watching. So that, I suppose, makes me feel at ease here this evening. And day to day in interactions, not as much, Sarah, I suppose. I don't experience social anxiety as much. And I think it's because I've more understanding of it, and I'm very aware of it. And, I was very fortunate to be part of the Social Anxiety Ireland 14-week programme about 3 years ago. So I suppose I'm actively working on it, and that helps. I'm in conversation about it a lot, So, and also I think I'm in the last couple of years, I've noticed I'm more honest with those close in my life. I'm comfortable having these conversations. I want to, with my family and my friends, and that really helps. It normalizes it. And the more I'm talking about it, like I say, the more you hear other people experience different anxieties in their life as well. And it's very normal. It's very, very normal. So not as much now, actually. No, not as much, thankfully. But that's not to say I don't experience it. I do from time to time. But I'm aware of it. That's the difference. And maybe not giving myself as such a hard time about it,
Yeah. Self-compassion.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And I think that's really encouraging as well, and hopefully people watching this, that's a great message, that things don't always have to be as difficult. And like you said, talking about people really does normalize it. And I'm just, I've got a question here for you, Lorna, and it's, a lot of people think that certain goals and dreams could never be an option for them with this condition. But you've become an actor and a teacher, and I'm just wondering if you have any advice for people, or if you'd like to tell people about that journey of how you started acting or teaching, or your experience of it, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I suppose, there's lots of success stories out there of people who have made very successful lives, whilst at the same time maybe experiencing a mental health difficulty or challenge in their life, and be they actors or musicians or writers or teachers or sports stars or athletes. There's many stories out there of people who have led very successful lives. And just because you're experiencing a challenge within your life, it doesn't define you in any way. Just because I've experienced social anxiety, I'm not walking around with a big label on my head that says social anxiety. Not at all. It's just something I've experienced, and it's absolutely fine. And whilst it can run parallel to your life, whilst you're living with it and taking steps to overcome it, I actually think it makes you a stronger person. And if you do have beliefs or, aspirations or dreams that you want to fulfill, I think 100% it's possible. And I think actually it drives you more to realize those dreams if at the same time you're experiencing, say, social anxiety or depression or some type of obstacle in your life that's quite difficult. So for me, I suppose I realized early on when I took drama classes for the first time in Longford, I realized I felt so much at home within that environment, and so much so that I pursued my studies in drama and theatre studies at UCC, and discovered at UCC that I love acting, and that's where I felt most at home, when I was on the floor playing a character as opposed to sitting around in a circle talking about a play. That's where I found I struggled and I had more difficulty trying to express my thoughts. But when I was up on the floor acting out a scene, I was more able to bring my understanding to life, I suppose. And I got a lot of encouragement whilst I was in college that made me want to, I suppose, consider then becoming an actual professional actor. And that's why I studied actor training at the Gaiety School of Acting. And I've been very fortunate that I've got many wonderful breaks both on stage and screen, and it's been wonderful for me. And whilst at the same time, experiencing anxiety and social anxiety, but whilst I was living my life as an actor, I was also taking steps to overcome that discomfort within, and I suppose a lot of maybe a lot of artists or creative artists may, not everybody, but may have a quieter disposition, maybe a little bit shy or experience a little bit of social anxiety, and find they can express themselves more through their art, through their writing, through their acting, through their writing of music, whatever it is. Not everybody, but a lot of people may relate to that. And I suppose being a teacher then as well, I'm very fortunate that I'm able to be a teacher and I suppose share my knowledge of drama and theatre with my students now, and I love my teaching. And with teaching, I have a syllabus to follow, so there's a security within that as well. So it's almost like I'm playing a role following the syllabus, being a teacher. But social anxiety might make itself known in the kind of the breaks between work, or if I'm working on a play, the breaks in rehearsal, that kind of thing. That's when I might notice my social anxiety flare up a little bit. In the past anyway, that's definitely my experience. But like I say, I'm taking steps to actively overcome it and create some space between me and it, and see if what it is, that it's not real, and learning to overcome it and to live my life as best I can.
Yeah, totally. It's amazing, and I think a lot of people take inspiration out of what you just said. And I'm sure you're amazing at relating to people as well in your teaching and in that role, because I think when you experience any kind of anxiety difficulty, you really understand people as well, or you're aware, you have awareness. Odhrán, just to go back to yourself, and I'm just wondering, is there something that people can do to support people with social anxiety? Is there something helpful in a social situation that someone else could do, or yeah?
It's a lovely question, Sarah, but challenging. Okay. I mean, I suppose if I was just to do a straw poll and ask 100 people, do you know anyone who's socially anxious? They probably wouldn't really. They'd probably struggle to or they'd be making guesses more than anything else. People with social anxiety are absolute expert at hiding it. Yeah. So, if you're saying 1 in 10 people is struggling in that way, really, it's very hard to see. Unfortunately, my sense is, and back to what we're kind of the earlier kind of theme is, unless people with social anxiety, I suppose, begin to share a little bit about themselves to other people, people really are in the dark about what they can and can't do. I mean, you can be kind of general about the whole idea of treating anyone with a degree of compassion and kindness, or maybe being aware of somebody is struggling or pulling back from something, to kind of to be gentle and compassionate around those kind of situations. But that's generic in some ways. I mean, I'd like to think everyone's going to be like that towards everyone else in an ideal world. I think it's very important, if people do begin to talk about it, that people listen. Because I think what happens is an awful time, and even people regularly say, I go to the GP even when I say this, and it's kind of dismissed as in, that's nothing. or you'll get over that, or should we all struggle with that in some degree, and it's minimized or belittled in some ways, and then people shut down again. So that kind of sense that my hope would be people would actually take a little bit of time to listen to what people are saying when they're struggling and believe them. If they've got to the point that they're saying it, you know, they've taken a massive step. They put themselves out there quite significantly. They're doing what their whole sense is screaming not to do, you know, to take that risk. And for it to somehow be minimized or not heard or dismissed, I think it'd be the worst thing. I think if we really listen in some ways, we'll identify lots of bits and pieces within ourselves, you know, that we can relate to, because it is a very human experience to struggle in this way at times. As I said before, we all, I think you mentioned it as well, Sarah, we all need to feel connected.
Yeah.
And anything that kind of threatens that creates a huge degree of anxiety on people. And I think that's what people with social anxiety are living in, a constant threat that their sense of connection to other people will be undermined. Through that kind of internal dialogue of, you know, I'm not good enough to be connectable. And also that other kind of sense that other people are very judgmental. So a lot of people with social anxiety have the view of other people being very harsh and judgmental. And anything that other people can do to offset that, I think, won't be any harm. I don't know if that's addressing your question, really. I know I fudged it a little bit because it is a challenging one.
I don't think you did that at all. And I think, like you said, it takes huge courage for someone to come forward and to say that they're experiencing any kind of unease or difficulty with social interaction. And I think you're dead right. We all need to be open and to be ready to listen and not to undermine it, or, you know, any kind of anxiety in any way, you know, just to listen, I guess.
There is a stigma over all mental health issues in a general way, which is reducing over time, which is great. But there are certain ones like social anxiety where we don't really hear too much about it because the stigma is so high, people don't talk. Hence, again, this opportunity is wonderful from my perspective, that people might hear that this is a thing. It's not shyness, it's a whole different ball game altogether. If it's shyness on steroids. It's just completely different.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think the Irish humor and the dryness of the Irish people probably doesn't help.
We do have a propensity to slag, yes. I think we mean well when we're doing that. It's a way of communicating it. We're self-deprecating in some ways. It's when we miss the line, and I think there's always that kind of line that we should know it's there, you know. And the problem with the line is, I think people think, oh, here's a line, I won't go over it for everyone. And it's like, no, there's different lines for different people.
Yeah.
Some people's lines are very, very, and you have to be very, very kind of cautious. And other people, you can almost call them anything and then bounce off them. So it does vary. There's a skill in slagging well in this country, which is a dreadful thing to say. Yes, I mean, it's part of a character. It's when it gets nasty. I mean, it's more. We're talking really more about the kind of the bullying type of interactions that are less light and kind of soft and kind of meant to be just more humorous for everyone involved. There's a difference, I think, between the kind of the gentle goodwill slagging and the harsh criticism.
Yeah, no, I think so.
That we can dole out to people at times.
Being aware.
Yeah.
My next question is actually to both of you. So, and it's this idea that people have a picture in the head of someone with social anxiety, the shy person in the room. And this is kind of actually touching on what you both already said. But social anxiety is not necessarily tied to someone appearing shy. Would you agree with that statement?
I very much agree with it. Of course, there will be certain people who will be on the quieter side, and will be kind of retiring. But as I said, they're experts at hiding it. So really, really, mostly no. And you definitely have some people with social anxiety who would seem to be extremely well able to be entertaining. They'd be great at telling a story, great at telling jokes, great at the kind of person you'd want in your company. You've no idea, though, the anxiety they experience on the way to that place or after when they're leaving, and they're utterly exhausted. So it's a way of managing other people's perception you can keep quiet so you can't say anything to kind of trip yourself up and make yourself look silly. Or you can go into the kind of charm offensive where you're out there and you're everything to everybody. Yes, they live amongst us, but we don't know. They're like aliens in some ways. They're seemingly completely normal and human, and yet below the surface really struggling. I don't know if Lorna would agree with that.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, like I say, I attended the Social Anxiety Ireland 14-week program about 3 years ago, and it was myself and about 10 others in the group, and I would never think of anybody that they were particularly shy or socially anxious in any way. And we all said the same thing about one another, you know, so it's not obvious. And yeah, oftentimes, like Odhrán said, it can be somebody who's very chatty, very, confident, coming across maybe as confident and at ease, but inside they actually may be experiencing anxiety. So it's not always very, very obvious. And you can be very, very surprised if somebody does share with you that they do experience social anxiety. You just never know. Because like Odhrán said, it can be very well hidden over years of practice of just, you might just have coping mechanisms that you use to help you within your social situations. So yeah, it's worth keeping in mind.
And indeed, Sarah, sometimes the quiet people in our company are very comfortable with their quietness. They're just kind of generally introverted. It's okay. They're no big deal. What really gets people with social anxiety, the ones, I think they can often manage to talk and do stuff quite well through practice and through, it's almost like they act all the time and act very well. It's sometimes it's the body that kind of fails. So you heard maybe mentioned in some of the videos there, or the commentaries there, the blushing that might begin to happen, or the sweating, or your mind blank.
Yeah,
Classic.
That was terrible, Lorna.
Classic stuff. And it's kind of, but you had the courage to say, "Oh, I've had a mind blank," and whatever. For someone else, they would almost freeze and just kind of ignore it and carry on, hoping that no one would have noticed. So there's lots of those kind of more either mental ones like racing thoughts or mind blank or those kind of things that really drive people demented in terms of, and a great concern in terms of it kind of showing itself in the social encounters, or the more physical stuff like the sweating and the blushing or the shaking or the voice shaking. And the fact that they may be obvious would really kind of occupy people's minds so much so that they spent most of their time in the social world self-conscious, not other conscious. They're kind of wrapped up in themselves in an awful ball of anxiety and shame.
And I guess those physical symptoms would that build that sense of anxiety then for the next time.
Oh, even within the time. So if the person gets to notice they're sweating, the very notice of the sweat itself becomes a form of threat to them. So it just escalates the threat value upwards, and it just sometimes escalates out of, so people just bolt and escape at the earliest convenience. Yes.
And this is kind of, I hope I'm not going off topic here, but in those situations, is there anything that someone could do? So say they're in a social situation and they're experiencing these physical symptoms. In that moment, is there any tips or?
Oh, I mean, I completely get where you're coming from. To be honest with you, I think if things get to a point where they've escalated out of control, I would encourage people, absolutely get out of there.
Okay.
Don't torture yourself. I mean, you've already traumatized yourself millions of times before. No need to do it again. And I pull them back and say, okay, before you're going in there, we're going to have to start planning strategy, planning kind of skills you might need to learn. So if you're going back to we talked about the kind of awareness. You mentioned, and I agree with you entirely, Sarah, the idea of acceptance, and I think Laura touched off it, finding ways to have a better relationship with ourselves and accept that at a certain level of anxiety and discomfort is almost inherent in living, that mistakes are inevitable. So there's a kind of acceptance of that. But I think acceptance only comes down the line after we've learned a little bit of control.
Okay.
It's easier to accept something that you have some degree of control over. So there can be lots of things you can do in advance of. I mean, one of our essential ones is, well, you're self-conscious while there. So your attention is focused inwards.
Yeah.
you're missing what's happening in your world. You're seeming preoccupied. And that attention to self and attention to all that internal distress simply is stoking a fire. So if you can get your attention outwards, so attentional control training, or mindfulness, I think is the modern word for it now.
Yeah.
But very focused type of mindfulness would be a kind of a skill I would look for people to generate before landing themselves in the middle of those kind of circumstances. That's one example.
Okay. Yeah.
But my sense is, no, it's like you don't learn how to drive a car in the middle of Collins Street during rush hour. If you have any sense, you don't. You practice out in Dollymount Beach somewhere. You get used to it, and then you bring yourself in. So my sense is almost, train in advance so that when you get there, you'll have some better control over things.
I don't know if you have anything you want to add to what Odhrán has just said, or.
Yeah. Well, to be really, really honest with everybody this evening, just like you were saying there, Odhrán, about the post-mortem and how much you can be giving yourself a hard time. I, at the moment, am giving myself an internal hard time about me being here this evening, about my contributions and what I'm offering, and did I speak well enough? Did I express myself clearly enough? Oh, I lost my words there. And so I'm actually having a bit of a anxiety now, even just giving myself a hard time about how I'm coming across this evening. So I'm just saying this because this is typical of the thinking you might experience having social anxiety. You're constantly giving yourself a hard time. You're putting yourself under so much pressure to be this perfect person, to express yourself so clearly, not allowing yourself to make one little mistake. You have to be perfect. And even preparing to be here for this evening, the last few days I've been going over my notes, thinking, what am I going to say this evening? And not trusting myself that I'll find the words in the moment. So I just thought I'd share that because that's what's going on for me at the moment. I'm here, but also my mind is a little bit elsewhere as well, going over like what I've shared this evening, and was it okay? Was it good enough? So when you say, Odhrán, the post-mortem, that's what triggered that in my mind, because I'm kind of giving myself a post-mortem on what I've already shared this evening. And that anticipatory anxiety as well in advance of an event. And for example, like I mentioned in the sharing tonight of a date situation, if you're going on a date, the anticipatory anxiety, will I be good enough company? Will I have enough to say? What do they think of me? All of this. And then after the actual date, did I come across all right? Oh, they were so much more articulate than I am. All of this kind of thing. That's very typical, I suppose, of the thinking you might experience. But yeah, like I say, I'm very aware of it, and as best I can, I'm trying to create a lot of distance between me and it, and learning to overcome it, or to take steps to help me in my life to overcome it. In the last 3 years, meditation has become a part of my life, and that's really, really helped me to calm myself, to calm my thinking, and to be able to be in the present moment, like Odhrán, like you were saying, just to be in the present moment. Every week on Zoom, we meet with the social anxiety group, and that's wonderful. We're all just engaged in conversation, and it's lovely to have that support check-in every week. Creating this piece, Ever Felt, has really helped me as well, because I feel I'm creating something positive out of something that has been very, difficult and challenging for me in my life up to now. And like I said earlier on, I feel I'm at a stage now where I want to share, because of something that can be so difficult and horrible to live with, that I kind of wanted to take back control in a way, and not to let it dictate how my life will run. Actually, no, I'm going to take the reins now, and I will lead my life, and not allow it to impact on me in the way it has done, in my life, I suppose. And I would hope like that if there are people listening tonight that, that if they feel in any way they'd like to talk to me, I'm very happy to talk to anybody if they, about anything that they might be going through. If they feel they'd like to share and share with somebody, I'm here. And also that they might consider then opening up the conversation with somebody about something that is troubling them, because it's not worth suppressing it or holding it in. I know it's like, I've had many quiet nights here on my own and going through something and just being too afraid to share it. Like, I'm going back years now when I would have been too afraid maybe to go home and say to my parents, I'm not feeling so well. But eventually I would have done, because I would have been just so too big to hold myself. And anytime I did share with my parents, I was always met with such love and understanding and support. And I felt immediately so much better having shared it. And that conversation is very open now with my parents and my family and my friends. It's, you know, I can get straight to the point. You know, there's no holding it in for weeks and months before I dare say anything. It's an open conversation now. But it's taken a little bit of time to get there. But I feel now I'm very comfortable having this conversation. And it's too important to hold in, because we only have one life, and life is too important to have it affected by a nasty inner critic that's trying to make life so difficult for you. I want to, you know, eliminate that and take it away and live my life and enjoy my life and make the most out of my life, and for everybody to have that experience.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think that's an amazing answer, and incredibly brave, and also very generous, because you just kind of said what a lot of people would be feeling in this kind of situation, you know, and quite often we're too scared to say that out loud, and you just said it out loud. So I think that was just a wonderful response, and thank you for sharing that. And I'm quite aware that we're getting quite a few questions in from the audience, and I am keen to get to that as well. But just before we do that, Odhrán, what kind of support is available for people who think they may have social anxiety, or how do they get started with seeking support or help? Or
I think, unfortunately, there's very little in this country as things stand. Half the reason, I suppose, we set up the charity. Even within that, I mean, we get so inundated with kind of people applying, and we could be much bigger if we had the kind of resources. Being by and large, it's that classic stuff of going through your GP to get your local community mental health team, but I think you need to be really open when you get there, that this is what you're struggling with. You know, if you've got a sense of it in some ways, because I think so many people we eventually end up in those services going because they're depressed or as we talked about earlier, kind of maybe alcohol misuse. And therefore there are many people, I think, in people's kind of people like myself working in HSC, you know, on our waiting list with social anxiety, that it's not being expressed even in those circumstances. So we can't really kind of get through to. So being honest with wherever you go with that. Obviously, if you apply to ourselves, we do our best to try and get you involved. I know our work is a bit probably more daunting, and that we throw you in a group, which is probably terrifying. I'm sure one-to-one will probably seem much more comfortable. But unless we have awareness increased, I don't think we're going to have the services required, unfortunately.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a kind of a bleak answer to you, I'm afraid.
But I guess,
but honestly, we're being all about being honest tonight.
Yeah.
There's loads of services. Go out there, you tomorrow, and you'll be seeing the next time. It just isn't like that.
But do you think, as a starting point, getting out and talking to your friends and your family, and that?
Yeah, just choose them carefully. Choose them carefully. I mean, just to go from kind of being that inhibited, I suppose, to being to anybody and everybody. No. I would say, think about who you might, and deliver small pieces, and just see how they land.
Mm-hmm. Gillian Butler has a very good book as well called Overcoming Social Anxiety and Shyness, which I found very good to read. So that might be a book some people might be interested in reading. Gillian Butler, Overcoming Shyness and Social Anxiety. And also, you know, on YouTube as well, there's lots of, you know, TED Talks maybe on social anxiety that might be of help to people. Meditation I find really, really helpful. Self-compassion also, I found that very, very helpful as well, just to be kinder to yourself. And like Odhrán said, and Sarah, you were saying, you know, just sharing with a trusted friend or a family member, that really helps. Once you have that conversation, a problem shared is a problem halved. You'll feel so much better. And it's worth it. If there's somebody in your life that you can speak to, I would definitely encourage you to do that. I know when I did, I felt so much better. And what else could you do? Like just, sports. I find exercise really, really good, just to feel strong within myself. If I'm keeping fit myself, that's one thing I can control in my life, just keeping active and fit. And you always feel good after being out for a walk or a jog or a run or a cycle or yoga, that all helps. Doing what you can to feel better, not to be suffering needlessly.
Yeah. So the idea of kind of self-care as well.
Yeah.
I'm just keen to try and answer some of the questions from the audience. I think this conversation on your piece has clearly touched a lot of people because there's quite a few questions coming in. This is one, and I'm just going to put it out there, and feel free to answer. Wow, this was an incredibly brave piece. Was your social anxiety ever an obstacle in bringing this from concept to audience? And if so, how did you overcome that?
Well, I have a wonderful family, and I shared my piece with my parents and my brother Darren, actually, and they were very, very supportive of it, and also they were very, whilst they could recognize in it that it was very important and worthwhile to share, their concern was me, and was I okay to share it? They wanted to make sure that that Lorna, their sister, their daughter, was okay to share it. And it was very good for me to be having those conversations with my parents and with Darren, because it got me thinking about, am I ready to share this? And I 100% I am. But it was good for me to really just sit with it for a few days and think about it. And I was saying to my mum on the night that the festival was launched, that if I was here talking to you saying I decided in the end not to share it, I would be so disappointed, because this isn't something that was born in the last few weeks or months. This is something where the seed was grown a couple of years ago. The opening piece to Everfelt, the 6-minute voice recording, that was written a couple of years ago. So I knew I wanted to do something with that. I thought it might be a play, but I wasn't quite sure. And in the end, it ended up just me, as you could see tonight, just talking to camera about my experience, because I didn't want to play a character, because it's not a character, it's actually me. It's Lorna that's experienced this. And I knew I wanted to do this, and I needed to do it for myself. So yes, whilst it was a little bit daunting to share something so personal, I really wanted to, and the support I've received throughout has been incredible. And that's really carried me along in this process to do it.
Yeah, and I think that's the power in the piece, is the personal aspect of it, and I think that is the element that will touch in people, because it's what makes it relatable. I just another question here, and I guess I'll just read it out, and you can see. Do you think it's possible to be cured of social anxiety, or is this something that will always be part of a person that has to be managed?
I would say that social anxiety is a part of everyone's life, and the only difference between one section and the other is one section manage it better. I think we all manage it in some ways.
Yeah.
Can we kind of get rid of any kind of concerns about not connecting with other people? And to get rid of that is to get rid of our humanity. So, it's part and parcel of life. We have these emotions, they function, they have a function, they're necessary. Yes, for some people it gets so out of kilter in some ways, it's so intense and so enduring that they become really, really difficult. I would see it more about coming down a continuum to a place where you can still function. I mean, I'm often struck about people where, you'll see them and you'll see them a couple of years later, and you'll measure them in some ways in a kind of a psychometric kind of way. And you say, oh, look at this, great. You're now down where normal people are. And it's almost like a disappointment, like, this is as good as it gets. Sorry, this is the way they're, because I think with that perfection, the sense that over there it's all glossy and people are absolutely fine. There's nothing going on under the surface. They're fine. And over here is bad, where it's like, no, it's still there, but they're managing it better. They're still functioning, and there's enough going on in the world in some ways to make life, enjoyable.
Yeah.
So can it ever be got rid of? No.
Yeah.
Can it be maintained and contained and kind of embraced and utilized and brought to a level where it functions almost for you rather than against you? Yes.
Yeah. So is this idea like nothing is perfect?
No.
Really. And it's just before we should probably finish it up. But this is one. What are the most common contributing factors to a person developing social anxiety?
Whoops.
Is that a tricky one?
There's so many. I would break it down into two broad strands, basically. One is the kind of, I suppose, as we know, and anyone that has more than one child will certainly attest to this, that children are born differently. They're born with a different temperament. And there are certainly children who are born more sensitive, who go on to become sensitive people. I'm forever arguing the world needs sensitive people. It's, our actors. our health professionals hopefully have a sensitive disposition. Some, and again, there's all variations in that. So some people can be highly sensitive. That's not necessarily a bad thing. So if that on one side, and on the other side, I would describe social traumas. So certain circumstances where people have experienced, particularly sensitive personality or sensitive temperament, harsher judgments, being ridiculed or being undermined or being, being drawn out. As you say, we slag in this country, we bully, unfortunately, at times. And so any circumstances like that, and the combination, I suppose, is there, that I think can lead to this. You hear people's stories over the years, and there's all kind of very different kind of stuff out there. But at the center of it, the sense of being judged, and being made to, and being ridiculed in some form or fashion. Now, the other person mightn't have meant it in some ways. You'll certainly have some people who will nail it down to the actual event. I remember that day that happened, and I was mortified.
Yeah.
That's probably more rare, where other people will say, no, there's not the small little bits and pieces across the way that happened. And it was me and my understanding of that I suppose brought me to where I am now. So I'd have that sensitive disposition, which is not a judgment in itself, coupled with some kind of social traumas, be them not the small ones or the big one.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm just wondering if either of you would like to, if there's anything we've overlooked tonight or anything else that you maybe want to say before we finish up, or.
I would like to say a real big thanks to the people who did the voiceovers in that, and they were part of our support group. And I recognise the voices. I won't mention their names, and I think they were equally brave to kind of lend their voices to Lorna's piece. And I think it does add an extra kind of, like, it's not just Lorna. I have 5 other people kind of talking in very similar ways. So I think that was a nice piece of bravery and courage on their behalf, and I thank them.
Yeah. And Lorna, yourself, or?
Absolutely. Thank you, Odhrán, for that. I would echo Odhrán's, big thank you to Stephen, Lara, Ciara, Connor and John. I really, really appreciate them contributing their voices. And, they, as well as my contribution and their contribution, you can tell that it's, I suppose, very similar concerns that you would experience. We're all coming from different parts of our, I suppose, different walks of life, but yet we're all sharing the same fears and vulnerabilities that you might experience with social anxiety. So a massive thank you to everyone. And also a big thank you to Ali Mercado, a Kilkenny-based illustrator who created the beautiful imagery throughout Everfelt. And he was just so kind and so generous throughout the whole creation of the project. And just to say that everybody gave of their time freely for this project because of a belief in the message and to create awareness. So a big thank you. And also a big thank you to Odhrán for his support to me from the get-go, from our first conversation about this. He was incredibly supportive and, offered his help in any way. And I'm just so grateful to him for being here tonight also and sharing his words. Thank you, Odhrán, and thank you, Sarah, as well, for your lovely presence and for being so kind and generous in your words and so supportive. And also thank you to the audience for being here this evening and listening, and for your presence. I can feel your support, so thank you so much. Yeah, thank you.
No, absolutely. And thank you both. Lorna, got your name now, cemented. And Odhrán as well. I think this conversation had a huge impact on people, and we're delighted that you were both able to do this tonight and be part of the festival. And yeah, just a huge amount of gratitude and thank you. And yeah, it was great talking.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.